Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Zach's Lie. Zach has just punched someone. This is all some new information for if you were in my intervention or if you are just joining in with me, but everyone is caught up and we're continue reading. So, on to page 88. So, we left here. Wait here. She disappeared through the door and reappeared 5 minutes later. He's ready for you. I don't understand. What does Sam just go in? So remember, instead of suspending him, he's been brought to the custodian's area. He's ready for you. I don't understand. What does Sam just go in? Mrs. Pyle said irritably. Mr. Sebastian will bring you to the office when he's finished. Finished with what? Zach thought as he stepped nervously into the dimly lit, narrow corridor running beneath the stage. At the end of the corridor was an open door with a bright light shining through it. Come on in, Sam called. Zach walked towards the light. Sam was sitting on a scarred but tidy workbench with his feet dangling over the edge. He was wearing the same khaki work clothes and boots that he had been wearing on the day they met. With the exception of the workbench, the room was not your normal custodial room. It was huge, taking up the entire area beneath the stage. On the ceiling were several trapdoors with large numbers stenciled on them. A heavy punching bag was suspended near one of the trapdoors with a chain. Zach had spent a lot of time in front of a bag just like it after he'd fallen from the window. Next to the punching bag was a weight set, which explained the muscles in Sam's arms and chest. Above the long workbench was a shelf filled with books, CDs, and expensive-looking stereo system. At the far end of the bench was a leather recliner. Standing above the recliner was a life-size mannequin wearing a full-length black cape and a mask. Zach stared at the Phantom. He was reminded of his caped crusader days. That's the Phantom's costume for the opera, Sam explained. Zach glanced around the workshop. Eric lived beneath the Paris Opera House. Your room is beneath the school theater. That's right, but there's no underground lake. At least not that I know of. I don't understand why Mrs. Pyle brought me here. Sam smiled. Let me see your hands. What for? The last person who had asked to see Zach's hands had been Agent Pelton, and that had not gone well. Just hold them up for a second. Zach did. Big hands. Sam jumped off the workbench and opened a cupboard underneath the workbench. He pulled out a pair of boxing gloves. Try these on for size. I'm not going to box with you. From what Miss Pyle said about your right cross, I don't want to box with you either. You might knock me out. He handed Zach the gloves. Just put them on. Why? Sam walked over to the punching bag and slapped it with his hand. Before we talk, I want you to beat up the bag for a few minutes. Get rid of the tension. Over the years, half the boys in this school, and some of the girls too, have been in here to have it out with my bag. Your friend Peter has been here in more than a dozen times. He's not my friend. I gathered that. Put the gloves on. Zach slipped both gloves on and tightened the laces with his teeth. Sam raised his eyebrows. I've seen you've had gloves on before. Zach held the gloves out for Sam to tie. How do they feel? They're a little small. Do you know the routine? Zach nodded. Sam got behind the bag and held it steady. Wail away. Zach's first punch was a half-hearted attempt that barely moved the bag. You can do better than that. Zach's second punch was harder. You're getting there. Think about your friend Peter. Whack, whack. Think about being uprooted from your home and friends against your will. Zach looked at Sam, wondering if he knew more about his situation than he should. Impossible. Whack, whack, whack. Think about anything that makes you really mad. Push the anger down into your arms, into your fists, and slam it into this bag. Dad, Zach thought. Whack, whack, whack. Sam had to lean all his weight into the bag to stop it from swinging. Until that moment, Zach hadn't realized he was angry at his father. How could he do this to us? Whack, whack. He didn't just abandon us. He made us abandon our lives, our identities. Whack. Wanda. Whack. She has new friends, a job, goals, and a future. Whack, whack. Mom. Leaving Dad to rot in jail. Whack. Her bookstore, her new life. Whack, whack. And the men who came to visit us that night. Zach stared at the bag, his arms hanging, his chest heaving. The men. I did nothing to stop them. They could have killed us. The men who might still kill us. Whack, whack, whack. He punched the bag until he could no longer lift his arms. It wasn't until he stopped, gasping for breath, that he realized he was crying. He felt the gloves being unlaced and saw Sam's face in a blur of tears. Sam guided Zach over to the recliner and sat him down. A moment later, he felt a glass of water being put into a swollen hand. Drink it. Zach had to hold the glass with both hands so he didn't drop it. His arms shook as he brought the glass up to his mouth. Sam brought him a towel. Zach wiped the sweat and tears off his face with the realization that something remarkable had just taken place. Rather than feeling embarrassed about breaking down in front of a complete stranger, Zach felt good. Calmness flowed through his body. He felt light, as if he were floating above the recliner. That was quite a session, Sam said, pulling a stool up in front of the recliner. What was that all about? Zach asked. How do you feel? Zach smiled. I feel good. Relieved, I guess. Sam nodded. That was about anger, Zach. I saw it in you the first time we met. I wasn't angry then. Yes, you were. And I thought you might be in here having a session with the bag before too long. He laughed. Didn't expect it this soon, though. You say that a lot of other guys have been in here. Not this year yet, but over the years, a number of them have paid the bag a visit. Sometimes Mrs. Pyle brings them down, sometimes a teacher does, and sometimes they just come down on their own before they get in trouble. In my other school, the vice principal was in charge of discipline, if that's what this was. We used to have a vice principal here who filled that role. He didn't have a bag, though. I took over when he left. We have a new vice principal now, but Mrs. Pyle liked the results so much that she asked me to continue. You've got to let it all out before we can sit down and really talk about it. Are you ready to talk about what's bothering you? Peter was standing in front of my locker. Zach didn't want to involve Caitlin. When I tried to open it, he got in my face. I guess I just blew up. I think there's a lot more to it than that. Sam stared at him, waiting for an answer. A lot more, Zach thought, but he couldn't tell Sam. He couldn't talk about it to anyone. What's happening to me? In my old school, I was never in serious trouble. Now I'm about to be suspended. It was just one of those things, Zach said. It won't happen again. Will I be suspended? Sam's eyes continued to stare at him for a moment, then gave him an odd grin. That's up to Mrs. Pyle. She said it was up to you. Custodians can't suspend people, Sam laughed. Have you made any friends here? Zach shook his head. Yes, you have. I don't understand. There's me, for one. I know that I may not be exactly what you have in mind when you think of a friend, but you're welcome to come by here any time for the bag, if you like. But you could just come by here to say hello or just talk. Thanks. School's out. Sam nodded towards the clock on the wall. Zach hadn't even heard the bell. We better go by Mrs. Pyle's office and find out what the verdict is. Zach waited outside Mrs. Pyle's office while Sam went inside to talk to her. When Sam came out, he winked and told Zach to go in. Mrs. Pyle said that she had talked to Peter's parents, and it was lucky for Zach they weren't upset about the fight. Peter's going to have a nice shiner by Monday morning, she said. He's been known to give a few himself in the past, and it would probably be best to stay clear of him. Am I suspended? No, I'm going to let you off this time, but if I ever catch you fighting with a classmate again, you're out of here, and I won't care what they did to deserve it. Thank you. You can thank Mr. Sebasta. I was ready to suspend you, but he talked me out of it. She stood up. You can go now. Zach started to leave. One more thing, Mrs. Pyle said, stopping him in his tracks. Sam said you were a smart kid, a reader. He told me you'd even read Phantom of the Opera. Is that true? Zach nodded. Well, keep your nose in a book and out of Peter Short's face, and you won't have any more problems here. When Zach left the building, he found Caitlin sitting at the bottom of the stairs reading a book. She closed it when she saw him and put it into her backpack. Peter is a jerk, she told him. I shouldn't have hit him. Maybe not. She pulled something from her backpack. I think you dropped this. Commander If was in the palm of her hand. His tiny helmeted head had been severed and was lying next to his body. You might be able to glue the head back on, Caitlin said casually, as if everyone in the school owned a tiny wooden astronaut. It might have gotten stepped on when you hit Peter. Zach stared at Commander If in shock. He wasn't upset that he had lost his head. He was upset that Caitlin had him in her hand. It's not mine. He hated himself for saying it, but he wasn't going to admit to Caitlin that he carried a toy astronaut in his pocket who was his imaginary friend. Really? Could have sworn that it dropped out of your pocket. Not likely. I guess it was I was mistaken. Caitlin slipped Commander If into her backpack and started to walk away, then stopped and looked back. Zach, I like the color of your eyes. Blue eyes, Zach thought. He watched her until she turned the corner. Chapter 11. He's writing in his journal. I can't believe that I abandoned Commander If. But what else could I have done? Thanks for picking up my imaginary friend, Caitlin. Are you impressed? Do you want to hang out with a guy whose best friend, whose only friend is an inch and a half long toy astronaut? And speaking of friends, my first genuine contact with a classmate was a right cross to his face. Not that Peter Short and I would have ever become friends, but this is not what I had in mind when I woke up last Friday. I wonder what Jack would have done if I was still him. Probably not. Jack would have walked away from the situation, shown up in English class without his book, and told the teacher he'd forgotten it. Mrs. Pyle has not called Mom. Yet. And I'm not going to tell her about Peter unless I have to. She has enough to worry about. I just need to calm down and try to keep the feeling I had after my session in Sam's lair beneath the stage. Caitlin has been on my mind all weekend. I wonder where she lives and what she really meant by liking the color of my eyes. We ran errands this week. On Saturday, we looked at cars for Wanda so she can drive to school and work without Mom having to chauffeur her. We found a used Honda with too many miles on it, and today we drove it all the way to Salt Lake, where Mom looked at computers. She couldn't decide which one to buy, so we drove all the way there for nothing. On the way to school, Monday, Zach was less concerned about making new friends. The calmness that had come over him after beating the heavy bag still remained, although his arms and legs were sore. When he walked up the stairs to the school, several people said hello to him. He tried not to act too surprised and pleased, but he was both. When he got inside, the first thing he did was look for Peter, who was not hard to find. He was standing in the hallway surrounded by half a dozen students admiring his black eye, which was the color and size of a charcoal briquette. When Zach walked up to Peter, the groupie stepped aside. I'm sorry about the eye. Zach held his hand out. Peter looked at Zach's hand for a second, then, you couldn't have touched me if I'd been expecting it. You're probably right. No hard feelings? We'll see. Peter did not take Zach's hand. Zach's next stop was the custodial room, but Sam wasn't there. After a short search, he found Sam in the boys' locker room, filling the soap dispensers. Morning, Zach. Thanks for helping me out on Friday. Sam shrugged his shoulders. It was no big deal. I apologized to Peter. Really? And how did Peter take it? I'm not sure. Well, I'd stay clear of him and his minions for a while. He's going to be thinking about what you did to him every time he looks in the mirror. Zach was relieved to discover that Caitlin was out sick. He had been thinking about telling her that the astronaut was his. Now he had another day to reconsider. During lunch, a couple of guys from his homeroom sat next to him, and he managed to have an actual conversation. One of them, Daryl Gill, lived a block from the Grangers and invited Jack over to his house. I'll give you a call after dinner, Daryl said. When Zach got home from school, he was surprised to find his mother there cleaning the house. Wanda was at work. Give me a hand, Mrs. Granger said. A contractor is coming over tonight to give me a bid for the carpentry work in the bookstore. How about putting the dishes in the washer for me? Zach started to load it up. How was school? Good, Zach said, and this time he meant it. Who's the contractor? A nice old guy. I checked his references today, and everyone says he's the best in town for this kind of job, and he's very reasonable. Apparently he has a couple of Basques working for him, and they're supposed to be excellent carpenters. Halfway through the dinner, the phone rang. It's probably for Wanda, Mrs. Granger said. You never know. Zach picked it up. It was Daryl. When he hung up, he told his mother he was going over to a friend's house for a while. She smiled. I want you to be home at 9 at the latest. Zach smiled back. It had been a long time since he had heard that. Too long. Daryl's father opened the front door of the house, and that wasn't much bigger than Zach's. Mr. Gill had red hair like his son, but that's where the similarity ended. He wore his hair in a crew cut, not down to his shoulders as Daryl did. He was a big man with large belly spilling over his belt. Daryl was small and could probably wear one of his father's pant legs as a skirt. You the kid that socked Peter Short in the eye? Mr. Gill asked. Zach wished Daryl had not told his dad. I guess so. Good! Come in! Inside of the Gill's house was set up exactly like the Grangers. Mrs. Gill was sitting on a love seat in the living dining family room, staring at the big screen television. Next to her was the smallest poodle Zach had ever seen. It looked like a squirrel with black curly hair. Neither Mrs. Gill nor the poodle looked away from the screen when Zach walked in. There was a deodorant commercial on. Daryl's in his room, Mr. Gill pointed to a door that would have been Zach's if he'd been in his own house. Thanks, Zach said. Mr. Gill joined his wife and the poodle on the love seat. Zach knocked on the bedroom door. No one answered. He opened up the door and saw Daryl sitting at the end of his bed in front of a television screen with a video game controller in his hands and headphones clamped over his ears. The bedroom was the same size as Zach's, but the decor was different. The walls were covered with photos of Daryl posing with dead animals, targets with bullet holes in them, and pictures torn from hunting magazines. The bedspread was made out of camouflage material, so were the pillowcases. G.I. Daryl, Zach thought. The game ended and Daryl slipped the headphones off. You play? Sure, Zach said, although this was not exactly true, which became obvious after Daryl blew Zach to pieces 26 times in just 11 minutes. Daryl switched the television off. I guess video games aren't your thing. Do you hunt? You mean animals? Duh. No, Zach said, but I'm not against hunting. Do you fish? No. But you aren't against it, right? Zach grinned. Right. So what do you like to do? I don't know. I guess I like to read. And we'll stop there for today. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.